Hello and welcome. My name is Crystal McGregor. We're live here at Cassinepec Bay Oyster here on Prince Edward Island, Canada's Food Island. Now here to tell you about oysters and the flavors of oysters, we're joined by no other than John Petcoff. Now, John Petcoff is an amazing oyster connoisseur. John, tell us a little bit about oysters and the merroir and dazzle us with what we need to know so we can look like pros when we're talking about oysters that come from PEI, Canada's Food Island.
Yeah, well, like we said, one of the things we've got now on the social shelves is a new oyster regions map. And that's what that entails. It's a map that depicts the 10 major oyster growing regions on the island, right? And even though oysters grow everywhere on PEI, there's obviously concentrations in certain areas, right? So the map was inspired from like what wine region maps have from different parts of the world. And so people, as you know, are getting more and more interested in where their oysters come from, how they're harvested, right? So this way here, they're able to trace sort of beginning through the different steps. Now, as far as the different regions and the different flavors, can't stress enough the fact that the flavor of oysters aren't something that's set. It's not like a bottle of wine where it's bottled, sealed, the thing. Oysters are influenced very much by the seasons primarily. Okay, as you know. So in the spring, summer, fall, and winter, PEI sees great changes in climate. So the oysters themselves, which are living animals under the water and in the rivers and where the rivers meet the bays, they undergo quite dramatic changes. Oyster flavors, like I said, even though it's not set, you can get a general idea by the main flavor of the oyster is obviously saltiness. Right. So all this liquid, right, that's in the oyster there is all what we call oyster liquor. That's essentially like a salt water in and amongst the oyster's sort of bodily fluids that it sends out into that as well. Because once the oyster is taken out of the water, it obviously closes, right? And then that's sort of sealed in. So that's the initial saltiness flavor. And the other sort of main flavor, especially in PEI oysters, is a kind of an earthy or meaty flavor. That's where you get what some people now call the umami flavors, right? So that's the only thing you can compare that to easily is sort of a raw mushroom. Okay, so if you know that flavor, and that flavor is sometimes accented, depending on the season, again, in the summertime more so, is a kind of a grassy or kind of a cucumber flavor.
So nice and light.
That's right, and that flavor is not as strong in PEI oysters. A lot of that is totally depending on the feed. Oysters feed off of microscopic animals and plants in the water column, right? So if there's more plant material, phytoplankton, then the oysters tend to be a little more grassy flavor.
That's right. Okay, so we got salty, we got grassy. What other flavors?
And then, like I said, the meat, the earthiness. Right. Then the other sub flavor, which is very important and a little more constant, is there's a mineral flavor to oysters. Because oysters, obviously living in the water column as they are, will incorporate the various minerals that come into the water. So there's iron, there's zinc, you know, there's these types of things that are very good nutrition values.
For boosting immunity, that's for sure,
That's a huge benefit to oysters nutritionally. And those will give a nice subtle, the only thing, sometimes if it's really strong in certain oysters, it almost tastes like licking a penny. Not that we have pennies in Canada anymore, but you know, like it has that slight
sort of metallic.
That's right. But it's subtle, right? Those are, again, very regionally directed because obviously the water where the oysters grow is fed by different streams. Those streams are coming through all different little tiny the whole watershed, right? So those minerals are picked up from wherever they come from. And then the final flavor of an oyster is what's called is the sweetness. Right. And sometimes when you bite into certain oysters, if you're obviously chewing them properly, you can get sort of a sweet flavor. The sweet flavor comes from the adductor muscle. It's just, there's glycogens or sugars in oysters naturally, right? The concentration of those glycogens is in the adductor muscle. The adductor muscle on an oyster is the same as its cousin, the scallop. You know the part that you eat the scallop, the big fleshy part? That's that adductor muscle. Scallops are obviously much bigger, the adductor muscle, because they move underwater. Oysters only use the adductor muscle to sort of open and close. So that's where you'll get that kind of sweet flavor from them. And again, Those vary quite a bit in concentration and different times of years. In the summer, like I say, when it's spawning, getting ready to spawn, you'll have a much richer, earthier flavors. Once the oyster spawns, the meat comes quite a bit smaller.
Okay.
Right, so if you harvest oysters, you're eating oysters kind of beginning of August, after the spawning season, they'll be much, much more salty because most of the body content that had those earthy flavors are gone out into the water, through the spawning process. And then once that sort of mid-August, then the oysters start feeding, building up the food nutrition that they're going to need to survive once the ice forms and all the phytoplanktons and the other diatoms, the animal matter that they live off of, die or go away. So oysters, the PEI oyster has to go into a sort of a semi-dormant state.
Okay.
So that's why you'll see oysters come August, September, October, which is traditionally the main oyster harvesting point, main oyster eating season. They'll be quite big and plump, and they'll have even more of that sweetness.
Right, so good this time of year.
That's right. So that's the difference. Like I said, oysters are great all times of year, but you'll get that. And as the winter goes on, then the oysters are sitting underneath the ice. They haven't been feeding at all. And they'll start to develop even more of the mineral flavors.
Okay, so you get more of that. Like,
that's right. So
exactly.
So those stronger flavors will come out. Because the sweetness will go down a bit. The earthiness and the grassiness will go down a bit because of they're not being accessed to those foods. So then you'll get that much. That's where you'll get the richer, like I said, almost like the metallic flavors. Someone like myself who eats a lot of oysters, I look forward to that quite a bit, especially around Christmas time.
Let's just recap those really quickly for everyone. So we have our saltiness.
That's right.
Which is going to be what's down in the fluid around it.
Yeah.
We're going to have metallic, depending on the season. Winter's going to be a little bit more metallic.
That's right.
So remember that so you can wow your friends. We have the grassy flavor, which you're going to get more of that in the summer when it's feeding on the plankton. All right. We also have a little bit of that sweet. So depending on reproduction.
Yeah, and from the mussel as well.
Yeah, and then we have the last one, the earthiness.
The earthiness.
Okay, so earthy, sweet, metallic, grassy, and what am I missing? Salty. All right, those are the five.
Great. And again, it's a journey of discovery. And I can't stress enough though, if you're interested in finding out those different flavors, the key thing is you've got to chew the oyster.
Okay.
Right? So
tell us a little bit about that. Let's see you do it. Let's see.
So you take the oyster in.
All right. We got some good chew going on here. This is good. Definitely we got a nice meaty oyster today. And you're going to kind of push that back a little.
And that's it.
Okay.
Now my mouth is filled, obviously, with the original, that umami flavor, the sort of raw mushroom. I'm getting a little bit of the grassy on the end. Not a lot of metallic right now, just at the very end, a kind of a dryness. Just a little tint of it. Obviously the salty, and then this is, since it's all a lovely clear shucked oyster, you can sip that last little bit of salt.
Nice.
Water.
So there we go. Those are a lot of the words and adjectives that you can use to describe oysters.
That's right.
And so yes, knowing the time of year, the season, the reproductive cycle, they all impact the flavor.
And one of the things that'll make a difference in oyster flavors, appreciating the oyster flavor, is actually how they're shucked. And right. So if you're doing raw oysters.
Yeah, let's get a close up of this.
It's really, to me, it's important to try to keep the flesh as sort of unmolested. As I say, as possible. So when you're going in with your oyster knife, you pop the shell open. I like to look in, and you want to cut that precious adductor muscle as clearly as possible. So see, now once you start recognizing how that looks like, just like a scallop, right?
Sure, now you know, I know that.
Yeah, so you got that beautiful fleshy part there. You don't want to ruin that. You're looking for any little tiny bits of shell. Because no matter how great the oyster tastes, if you're getting a big chunk of dirt in there, it's going to, but it'll also ruin your, you know what I mean? So then I cut the adductor really, really clearly on the bottom. And that's that. And I'll tell you, there's many ways you can eat oysters, obviously. A lot of people start from that. I do what's called the French method, where you go in sort of face first and kiss it up.
Okay, look at that. There we go. That's an oyster kiss right there.
The beauty of that is if there is any little sediment in the bottom.
Oh, you don't get it.
Sorry, you don't get it, right? This one didn't. But again, that one had a lot of, so these, then you get into a little sort of tiny oyster, what we call a cocktail oyster.
What about the shape? Does that really impact the taste
too? The shape doesn't, the shape will impact the taste only sort of in one way. That obviously the larger oysters have the bigger adductor muscle. Right, and so they'll be, where you get that sweetness, there'll be more sweetness as a rule in a larger oyster. Right? Of course, if these oysters come from the same harvest, they're both being in the same water column, so they would have relatively the same amount of phytoplankton or diatoms in them, right? Zooplankton, as they call it. So that would be main concept. But then again, a smaller oyster will tend to be milder just for the fact that it's tinier.
Right. So they have to call those the champagne oysters?
Cocktail oysters.
Champagne oysters. Yep.
Yeah. So again, a little tiny baby like this. Even though this oyster is not far off in age, it's not the matter of the time makes a certain degree of difference. Right. But it's like dogs or humans. Like some are tiny, some are big. You know, it's just a matter of.
And how old is this oyster? Because I heard there's a good trick in telling how old oysters are.
You can generally see, like this is oysters going into its third year, right?
That's
You've got like sort of, it's not every ring is 1 year, right? But you've got, you know, let me get into a big girl like this. I say girl because this species of oysters, the virginical oysters, they change their sex.
Right.
They start off usually either male or female, usually male. And after 2 or 3 years, when they get to a certain size, they switch over to producing egg only. So the big ones are girls, right? Right. So you're probably getting into 6 or 7 years.
Wow, look at that, 6 or 7 years. It's a lot of passion that goes into that one oyster.
Yeah, and then again, this lovely little.
Doesn't that look perfect? Wow.
Cocktail oyster. You've got a nice little adductor muscle there, beautiful clear liquid, right?
We do the slurp method. Here we go.
That's awesome. So here's, and again, just to, you know, sort of different kinds of different varieties. Like I said, it's all the same animal, all the Virginica or Atlantic oyster, but these ones here are from Malpeque Bay. This big one here is from New London. Here's another big New London oyster, right? The brown color of oysters is more common in oysters that are grown on surface culture. In the upper ends of the water column where there's a flow of, the PEI oyster, the rivers are tidal rivers. Even the lovely trout river here that flows into the Foxley where the oyster farms are for Cascapec Bay Oyster Company. This is high tide. In 3 hours from now, you could walk across this.
Wow.
You know what I mean? That's so how much of that flow comes in. So you're getting a huge inflow and outflow of water. Within that water is all kinds of other detritus and things like that, which tends to be more on the surface. That's what gives the darker oysters more their cocoa color, right? Right. Whereas oysters that come from waters that are less flowing like that, maybe up into like you get out to the west end of, to the east end of the island, the East Bays region, right? Like the Colville Bay or East Bays Company. Those oysters tend to be almost exclusively sort of this bright green color, right? If you've seen those. And again, that has to do just with not only the type of algae that's in the water, but also that there's obviously a lot less of that kind of detritus and the stuff that forms in the rivers.
So I guess the big takeaway is eat as many PEI oysters as you can, as often as you can, from as many places as you can on the island, so that you can develop your palate.
Exactly, Crystal. And that was very much our ambition with the Oyster Regions map, is to give people that impetus to go on the journey of discovery. They can discover it themselves by trying. You also have links to the different oyster processors. So once you if you find an oyster you like, the person who's serving it to you at an oyster bar at a restaurant may quite often know exactly where it comes from. If not, you can find the brand. You can go on the site, you can find the brand from the different processors, and they can determine, what you like. And again, I'm not saying you have to keep notes, but it's like wine tasting. I do, but you can keep, depending on how oyster nerdy you are, but you can keep little notes, you can keep mental records. You have the oysters, raw, or naked, so to speak, straight up when you're doing tasting. But condiments are great too. The oysters are salty, obviously, right? So sometimes a little lemon. Most of the condiments are citrus-based or vinegar-based. Right. And what that does is it sort of counters the saltiness. To it. It's the same way of having vinegar on your French fries or whatever. And same as almost all the different kinds of hot sauces are vinegar-based to one degree or another, right? So the only thing people, you can do whatever you want, but I'm saying if you want to really still taste the oyster, the different characteristics, with a little bit of a condiment, just use it sparing. You
can tell everyone about Prince Edward Island, Canada's food island, oyster map and guide to wow friends and family. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.